John Carter had always been a man of simple pleasures. His life was tied to the land, to the rhythm of the ranch he had inherited from his father. Every morning, as the sun peeked over the distant hills, John would rise with it, pulling on his worn boots and stepping into the crisp morning air. The smell of fresh hay, the soft lowing of cattle, and the gentle rustling of the trees had always brought him a quiet kind of happiness. This ranch was not just land to him, it was a living memory, a connection to generations before him who had poured their hearts into it. His wife, Mary, was his companion in every sense. She was the one who kept the home warm, tended the garden, and often helped him with the cattle when the workload was heavy. But more than that, she was his confidant, his cheer in the mornings, and his anchor in life. Their bond had grown slowly but firmly over years of shared dreams, late-night talks under starry skies, and laughter echoing through the old wooden halls of their farmhouse. Life had been quiet, peaceful, and filled with a comforting routine. On this particular morning, John followed his usual path to the barn. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky with shades of pink and gold. Birds sang their morning songs, and the cool breeze carried the earthy scent of damp soil and fresh grass. Everything seemed normal at first. He whistled softly, a tune he had carried in his head since childhood, and moved toward the barn with the ease of someone who knew every inch of his surroundings. As he walked, something caught his eye. Footprints in the soft dirt, leading toward the storage area behind the barn. They were small, light, and unfamiliar. At first, John thought nothing of it. Perhaps a neighbor had wandered by, or maybe some stray animal had left its mark. He shrugged and continued, telling himself not to worry over trivial things. Life on a ranch was full of small surprises. After all, inside the barn, the usual sights greeted him. Hay stacked neatly in corners, tools arranged with careful precision, and the faint smell of livestock mingling with the old wood of the building. John went about his chores methodically, feeding the animals, checking fences, and moving supplies as needed. Yet, a small unease had begun to grow in the back of his mind. Something felt slightly off, though he could not put his finger on it. By mid-morning, he had finished the bulk of his work and moved toward the back of the barn to check on supplies. It was then he noticed something that made his stomach twist. Several sacks, heavy and roughly tied, had been placed near the barn's back door. They were not there yesterday. He had been meticulous in organizing the barn, and these sacks were certainly new. Curiosity mingled with a creeping sense of fear. Who would leave sacks here? And why? John approached them cautiously. He tapped one with his boot. It made a dull thud, suggesting that it was not just empty or filled with hay. He listened closely, and for a moment, he thought he heard a faint sound, almost like a whisper, coming from inside. His heart began to beat faster. Maybe it's an animal, he muttered to himself, trying to calm the sudden surge of fear. Yet, something about the sound seemed oddly human. A barely audible noise that made his mind race with worry. He called out, expecting no reply. "Hello? Is someone there?" His voice echoed through the empty barn. Silence answered him, thick and heavy. He felt a chill run down his spine. The quiet that had always felt comforting on his ranch now felt ominous and foreboding. John stepped back and took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. His life had always been simple and predictable, but the presence of these sacks was anything but ordinary. For a moment, he considered calling the authorities, but hesitation held him back. What would he say? That he found some sacks? The thought seemed absurd, yet the uneasy feeling in his chest would not go away. He had always been a man of action rather than fear, and the need to know what was inside the sacks overpowered the creeping terror. Carefully, he bent down and untied the first sack, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. As the top of the sack fell open, his mind raced through possibilities. Tools? Animal feed? Perhaps even a box of forgotten supplies? He could not have been prepared for what he saw next. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Inside the sack, curled up and frightened, was Mary. Her eyes, wide with shock and fear, met his. She was alive, but clearly terrified and disoriented. her hands bound, and a gag that had been hastily removed dangling from her neck. John stumbled backward, disbelief and horror gripping him in equal measure. How could this happen on their own property? How could anyone harm Mary, someone so gentle and kind, someone who had spent her life nurturing and helping others? His mind spun as he reached for her, hands trembling, lifting her gently out of the sack. She shivered in his arms, and he held her close, murmuring reassurances that barely masked his own terror and confusion. Tears streamed down John's face as Mary clung to him, whispering in a shaky voice about how she had been taken in the dead of night. The details she shared were horrifying. Someone had been watching them, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And that opportunity had come while John was tending the cattle, and Mary had stepped outside briefly. Her fear had been palpable. The hours inside the sack, stretching into what felt like an eternity. The peaceful life they had built on the ranch seemed shattered in an instant. The quiet mornings, the rustling fields, and the warmth of their home now felt fragile, vulnerable to the cruelty of strangers. John's heart ached, not just from seeing Mary hurt, but from the realization that their sanctuary had been violated. The barn, which had always been a place of work and safety, had become a scene of unimaginable horror. Yet, even in the midst of fear and shock, there was a small glimmer of relief. Mary was alive. She had survived. And now they were together again. John gently held her as she began to regain composure, listening to her recount the terrifying ordeal. His mind raced with plans for security, vigilance, and ensuring that nothing like this could ever happen again. The ranch, once a symbol of simplicity and peace, now represented both the fragility of life and the strength of their bond. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its warm light through the barn's windows, John and Mary sat together, processing the morning's events. The peaceful life they had known might have been disrupted, but in that shared moment of fear, love, and relief, they found the first sparks of resilience. They knew that rebuilding their sense of security and trust would take time. But they also knew that together, they could face whatever came next. By the time the authorities were called and the investigation began, John and Mary were no longer just a couple living on a ranch. They were survivors of an experience that had tested their courage, their love, and their belief in the safety of their world. And even as the day faded into evening, the shadows of fear still lingering, they held on to each other, drawing strength from a bond that nothing, not even terror itself, could break. John could hardly believe what he had just seen. Mary, his loving wife, the heart of his life, had been trapped in a sack in their own barn. His mind raced as he tried to understand how such a thing could happen. The peaceful world they had built together on the ranch now seemed fragile, as if the very safety of their lives had been shattered in an instant. His hands were still trembling as he helped Mary stand, holding her close as she shivered in the cool morning air. Mary's eyes were wide, filled with fear and disbelief. She had never imagined that anyone could break into their home, much less harm her in such a frightening way. Her voice, when it came, was soft and quivering. "John, I don't understand. Why me? Why here?" she whispered, her hands clutching his shirt as if holding on to him would protect her from the memory of what had just happened. John shook his head, speechless for a moment. His protective instincts, which had always been a quiet part of his personality, now surged like a river breaking through a dam. "It's going to be okay, Mary," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "You're safe now. I've got you. We'll figure this out together." But even as he spoke, he felt a cold shiver of doubt. How had someone dared to invade their sanctuary? Who could do something so cruel, so calculated? As Mary recounted the events leading up to her terrifying ordeal, John listened intently, every detail sending waves of anger, fear, and sorrow through him. She had been taken during the night, snatched in a moment when the ranch was quiet, and left hidden inside the sacks. The hours she had spent trapped were endless in her mind, every second stretching into a lifetime. The darkness, the helplessness, and the uncertainty of what might happen had been overwhelming. She had feared not just for herself, but for John, wondering if he would ever find her in time. The story painted a chilling picture. Someone had been watching them, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The idea that a stranger had been observing their lives so closely was almost too much for John to bear. Every time he had felt safe on the ranch, every time he had enjoyed the simplicity of his mornings or the quiet of the fields, he now realized that someone else had been silently present, plotting. The sense of violation was profound. Despite the fear, there was relief. Mary was alive. She was unharmed physically, though deeply shaken. John could see the lingering tremors in her hands, the tear tracks on her cheeks, and the way her body instinctively leaned into his for protection. He felt a wave of gratitude and love that was almost overwhelming. Holding her, he realized that the terror of the morning had also revealed something powerful. Their bond, tested and strained, was unbreakable. John's first thought was to make sure Mary was truly safe. He led her into the farmhouse, closing and locking every door with care. The familiar surroundings, the worn wooden floorboards, the kitchen table with its scratches from years of family meals, the window that looked out over the rolling fields, suddenly felt like a fortress. Every small detail of their home seemed more precious, more vital. For the first time, the peaceful farmhouse had taken on a new meaning. It was not just a home, but a refuge. Mary, still trembling, was guided to a chair by the kitchen table. John fetched a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth of the fabric was meant to comfort her, but it also reminded him of how fragile their sense of safety had become. Even as he tried to reassure her, he could not ignore the gnawing fear that the threat might not be over. Whoever had done this might return. Whoever had been bold enough to invade their property could strike again if they were not careful. The silence of the house was almost deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside the window, made their hearts jump. John and Mary sat together, leaning into each other for support, trying to process what had happened. John's mind, always practical and methodical when it came to running the ranch, now raced with thoughts of protection, vigilance, and planning. He needed to understand how this could have happened, and more importantly, how to prevent it from ever happening again. Eventually, John decided they needed help. He picked up the phone and called the local authorities. His voice was steady, but inside he was a storm of emotions. He explained the situation carefully, recounting every detail he could remember. The dispatcher assured him that officers would arrive immediately and that an investigation would begin. John hung up and sat beside Mary, holding her hand tightly. The reality of the situation was heavy. This was not just a scare. This was a serious threat, one that needed attention and resolution. As they waited for the authorities, John and Mary began to talk, slowly at first, about the hours she had spent inside the sack. Mary's voice was shaky, but sharing the experience seemed to relieve some of the tension. She described the darkness, the feeling of being completely alone, and the overwhelming fear that John might not find her. Every word painted a vivid picture of courage under duress, of survival against odds that seemed insurmountable. John listened, feeling a mix of heartbreak and admiration. His wife had endured something unimaginably frightening and had survived with her strength intact. Even as they talked, John could not shake the sense of urgency. Their ranch, their home, had always been open and welcoming, a place where neighbors and friends felt comfortable visiting. But now, that openness felt dangerous. He thought of the fields where they worked, the barn where they kept their livestock, and the countless small spaces on their property that were now potential points of vulnerability. Every familiar sight suddenly seemed fraught with risk. When the authorities arrived, John and Mary recounted the events once again, this time in a more structured and detailed manner. Officers examined the barn, the footprints, and the sacks, taking notes and photographs. They reassured John and Mary that the perpetrator would be investigated thoroughly and that their safety was a priority. Despite their professional calm, John felt a lingering tension. The knowledge that someone had dared to breach their lives was not something that could be easily erased. After the officers left to begin their investigation, John and Mary were left alone again. But the emotional weight of the morning had not lessened. They sat together, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent, sharing the quiet that now carried a new intensity. John held Mary close, feeling the warmth of her body and the rapid beating of her heart. In those moments, he understood more deeply than ever that life could change in an instant, and that the love they shared was the one constant they could rely on. Mary, though frightened, began to regain her composure slowly. She leaned on John, drawing strength from his presence. Together, they made a plan to secure the barn, to check all doors and windows, and to be more vigilant about their surroundings. Even small details, like the placement of tools or the way the livestock were fed, took on new significance. Every precaution was now not just practical, but essential. Despite the fear, there was also a sense of determination. John and Mary realized that they could not allow this incident to define them or take away the peace of their lives. They would be cautious, vigilant, and prepared, but they would also continue living on the ranch, tending to the land and animals they loved. The morning's events had been shocking and terrifying, but they had also reminded them of the strength they drew from each other. As the day wore on, sunlight streamed into the farmhouse, casting a warm glow across the wooden floors. The ranch, which had seemed ordinary and peaceful before, now held a deeper meaning. It was a place of life, of memories, and of resilience. John and Mary, shaken but united, began to rebuild a sense of normalcy, knowing that the road ahead would require courage, patience, and trust. By evening, after meals were prepared and a quiet routine had returned to the house, John and Mary sat on the porch, watching the sun set over their fields. The colors of the sky, deep orange, pink, and purple, offered a moment of beauty and reflection. They held hands, feeling the comforting rhythm of each other's presence. The morning's horror had left scars, but it had also shown them the depth of their bond and the unshakable strength of their love. In the quiet of the evening, John made a silent promise. He would protect Mary and the ranch with every ounce of strength he had. He would ensure that their home, once again, felt safe and secure, and together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. Their hearts joined by courage, love, and the determination to never let fear define their lives. After the terrifying morning, John and Mary Carter sat quietly in their living room, trying to process what had just happened. The house, which had always been a place of comfort and warmth, now seemed to carry echoes of fear. Mary still trembled slightly, her hands clutching John's as she recalled the moments she had spent trapped in the sack. Each memory seemed to return with vivid intensity. The darkness, the uncertainty, and the helplessness. Even though she was safe now, the emotional weight of the experience pressed heavily on her chest. John's mind was racing, but he knew he had to be calm for Mary. He gently held her, trying to convey strength, even as his own heart thumped with worry. He could not imagine the terror she must have felt. Alone in the darkness, unable to move or call for help, his mind kept returning to the question of how someone could have done this. The very thought of a stranger planning and executing such an act on their property left him angry, frightened, and heartbroken all at once. In the hours that followed, John and Mary began to speak more openly about the ordeal. Mary described the fear she had felt, how every creak and rustle in the barn had seemed like a threat. She spoke of the moments when hope had felt distant, when she had wondered if John would find her in time. Her voice shook as she recounted these experiences, and John listened silently, offering comforting words but also feeling a deep sadness at the thought of his wife enduring such terror. The couple quickly realized that they could not face the aftermath alone. John called some trusted neighbors, people who had lived in the community for years and who knew the couple well. Within moments, friends and neighbors arrived, bringing food, blankets, and words of comfort. Their presence was reassuring, a reminder that even in the face of fear and danger, the strength of community could offer support and solace. Neighbors listened attentively as John and Mary recounted the morning's events. Some were shocked, others angry, and all were concerned. Many offered to help in any way they could, from securing the property to staying nearby in case of further trouble. The simple act of sharing their story, of letting others into their fear and relief, seemed to lighten the emotional burden slightly. Mary felt a small measure of comfort knowing she was not alone and that others cared deeply about her well-being. As the day progressed, John and Mary began to take practical steps to protect themselves. They inspected every part of their ranch, noting vulnerabilities and planning improvements. New locks, security measures, and better lighting became priorities. John understood that while the emotional scars were serious, the physical safety of their home and ranch needed to be reinforced immediately. The work gave him a sense of control in a situation that had otherwise felt chaotic and threatening. Mary, though still shaken, tried to focus on small routines that reminded her of normal life. She prepared meals, tended to the garden, and helped with the animals when she could. These simple tasks became a way to regain a sense of stability, a reminder that life could continue even after such a frightening experience. Each small action was a step toward recovery. Though the memories of the ordeal lingered in the back of her mind, John spent time speaking with local law enforcement, helping them understand the details of the morning's events. He gave careful descriptions of the footprints, the placement of the sacks, and any other unusual signs he had noticed. The officers promised a thorough investigation and reassured the couple that every effort would be made to find the person responsible. While this brought some relief, John knew that rebuilding trust in their home and surroundings would take longer than the investigation itself. That evening, the emotional weight of the day began to settle more heavily on both of them. Mary sat quietly, staring out the window at the fields, her mind replaying the terrifying events over and over. John sat beside her, holding her hand and offering silent support. They did not need many words. The presence of each other was enough. Together, they were slowly learning to navigate the complex emotions of fear, relief, gratitude, and lingering anxiety. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every sound, the wind brushing against the trees, the distant call of an animal, even the creaking of the old farmhouse made Mary startle. John stayed awake for much of the night, listening, reassuring her, and thinking about ways to increase security. Even in the darkness, the bond between them was evident. Their shared experiences and deep love provided a foundation of strength that no fear could completely shake. Over the next few days, John and Mary began to notice the subtle ways in which the experience had changed them. Mary found herself pausing more often, checking doors and windows, making sure the house and barn were secure. John became more vigilant, keeping a closer eye on the animals and the surrounding fields. These changes were not signs of weakness, but of careful attention and learning from the experience. They understood that while the incident was traumatic, it had also provided a valuable lesson in awareness and preparedness. The community continued to rally around them. Friends checked in regularly, offering meals, conversation, and support. Some neighbors suggested ways to improve fencing and lighting, sharing knowledge from their own experiences on similar properties. The warmth and care from the community gave John and Mary strength, reminding them that even in moments of fear and vulnerability, human kindness could provide hope and healing. Counseling became another important step in Mary's recovery. Speaking with a trained professional helped her process the fear and anxiety that lingered. She began to understand that the feelings of vulnerability and mistrust were natural responses to trauma. With guidance, she learned techniques to calm herself, regain confidence, and rebuild her sense of security. John supported her fully, attending some sessions alongside her and reinforcing the idea that recovery was a shared journey. As weeks passed, the immediate fear gradually began to recede. The security measures, community support, and counseling helped both John and Mary regain confidence in their surroundings. While memories of the morning would never disappear entirely, they no longer controlled every moment of their lives. The ranch, once again, became a place of work, life, and small joys. Feeding the animals, tending the garden, and walking through the fields returned a sense of normalcy that had seemed impossible at first. John and Mary also found that the experience strengthened their relationship in unexpected ways. They communicated more openly, expressed their feelings more freely, and drew comfort from the knowledge that they could face adversity together. The ordeal had tested their resilience, but it had also reminded them of the depth of their love and the importance of supporting one another in every circumstance. In the evenings, they began to reclaim simple pleasures that had been overshadowed by fear. Cooking meals together, sitting on the porch to watch sunsets, and sharing quiet moments in the house they loved. These small routines became symbols of recovery, proof that life could continue and that happiness could still be found, even after frightening events. The ranch itself began to feel alive again. The animals moved freely. The fields swayed in the wind. And the barn, once a place of fear, became a site of productivity and care. Each task John and Mary performed reminded them of their resilience and ability to overcome adversity. They understood that life could bring unexpected challenges, but they were now equipped to face them with courage, preparation, and unwavering support for one another. John often reflected on the lessons they had learned. Trust in the community, careful attention to safety, and the ability to remain calm under pressure were all vital. He realized that while fear was natural, it did not have to control their lives. By acknowledging their emotions, taking practical steps to protect themselves, and relying on the strength of their relationship, John and Mary could move forward with confidence. Mary, too, found moments of empowerment. She discovered that her strength was not measured solely by endurance, but also by her ability to seek help, communicate openly, and rebuild trust in herself and in her environment. The experience, while frightening, had shown her that resilience was born from both courage and connection. As the weeks turned into months, the emotional aftermath slowly transformed into a story of survival and strength. John and Mary no longer defined themselves by fear, but by the way they faced it together. Their ranch, once a symbol of simplicity, had become a testament to perseverance, love, and community support. They knew that life would continue to hold challenges, but they were prepared to meet them with the same determination and care that had carried them through the darkest morning of their lives. By the time the seasons began to change, the emotional storm of that morning had settled into a quiet awareness. John and Mary had learned to live with the memories without being controlled by them. They shared laughter again, experienced peace on their ranch, and found comfort in the routines that had once seemed ordinary but now felt precious. Every sunrise reminded them of survival, every sunset of love, and every task on the ranch of resilience. Even as the memory of the terrifying morning lingered, it became part of a larger story. A story not of fear alone, but of hope, courage, and the enduring power of love. John and Mary understood that the heart could be fragile, but it could also be incredibly strong when supported by trust, care, and community. In the quiet moments of reflection, they knew that they had emerged stronger, more aware, and more united than ever before. Affirmation of life, love, and resilience. The morning that had shattered their sense of safety had left scars, but it had also revealed the depth of their strength, individually and together. Mary continued her therapy sessions, meeting regularly with a counselor who helped her process the lingering anxiety and fear. At first, even small tasks, like walking to the barn or checking the fences, made her heart race, but through patience, guidance, and the constant support of John, she gradually regained confidence. She learned techniques to calm herself, manage her fear, and regain control over her thoughts. Each small step was a victory, and over time, the shadow of terror began to lift, replaced by determination and renewed courage. John, too, found that he needed to process the morning's events. While he had been the protector, the one offering strength to Mary, he had also carried a heavy burden of fear, anger, and guilt. He spent time reflecting on how they could prevent such an event from happening again, carefully planning improvements to their property. The barn was reinforced, locks were replaced, and security cameras were installed in key locations. John's hands-on approach to safety gave both of them a renewed sense of control, transforming the ranch into not just a home, but a sanctuary once again. Their community continued to play a vital role in their recovery. Friends and neighbors stopped by regularly, sharing meals, checking on the livestock, and offering words of encouragement. The simple presence of caring people reminded John and Mary that they were not alone. That even in the face of fear, there was a network of support ready to help. Some neighbors shared their own experiences of unexpected challenges, creating a sense of shared resilience that strengthened the couple's sense of security and belonging. As John and Mary returned to their daily routines, They began to appreciate the smaller, previously unnoticed moments of life on the ranch. The sun rising over the fields, the soft lowing of the cattle, and the gentle rustle of trees in the wind became symbols of life's continuity. Feeding the animals, tending to the garden, and repairing fences were no longer just chores. They were affirmations that life could move forward, that stability and safety could be restored. Mary also found solace in reconnecting with her hobbies and passions. She spent more time in the garden, nurturing plants and flowers that reminded her of growth, renewal, and beauty. Each new bloom became a small symbol of hope and perseverance. She also began journaling, writing down her thoughts and feelings to release the tension and fear that had built up. Writing became a therapy of its own, allowing her to reflect on the journey she had taken from fear to resilience. John, meanwhile, focused on the land and animals he loved. The ranch was not just a source of livelihood. It was a connection to generations past and a testament to the life he and Mary had built together. He repaired fences with extra care, checked on the livestock with renewed attention, and walked the fields more often, observing and appreciating the beauty of the landscape. The act of working on the ranch became a form of meditation, helping him process the trauma and transform fear into productive energy. Together, John and Mary began to reclaim their evenings. Once filled with lingering fear, now turned into moments of reflection and connection. They cooked meals together, sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, and talked about their dreams for the future. Each conversation, each shared smile, reinforced the bond that had been tested but never broken. The experience had taught them that love was not just about happy moments, it was also about standing together in the face of fear and uncertainty. One afternoon, as they walked through their fields, John and Mary reflected on the lessons they had learned. They realized that life could change in an instant, that safety was never guaranteed, and that vigilance was essential. But they also understood that courage, love, and resilience could carry them through even the most frightening experiences. Every step they took in the fields was a reminder that they had survived, that they had grown stronger, and that they were ready to face the future together. John also took time to mentor some of the younger members of their community. He shared his experiences about resilience, vigilance, and the importance of caring for loved ones. His story became a lesson not only about safety, but also about perseverance, the value of community, and the strength that comes from standing together in difficult times. Mary supported him in these efforts, offering her own perspective on courage and recovery, inspiring others with her story of endurance and hope. Over time, the sense of fear that had once loomed over their ranch diminished. The barn, once a place of terror, became a site of activity and productivity again. The fields, once viewed with caution, now stretched invitingly before them. Every repaired fence, every healthy animal, and every vibrant plant in the garden was a sign that life had not only continued, but had flourished despite the challenges they had faced. John and Mary also found new ways to strengthen their relationship. They set aside time to talk openly about their feelings, fears, and hopes. They celebrated small victories, like a productive day on the ranch or a peaceful night's sleep, recognizing that healing and recovery were ongoing processes. Their shared experience had deepened their understanding of each other, creating a partnership that was stronger, more empathetic, and more resilient than ever before. In quiet moments, they also reflected on gratitude. They were grateful for each other, for their health, for the community that had supported them, and for the land they loved so deeply. The terrifying morning had reminded them that life could be fragile, but it had also shown them that resilience, love, and courage could overcome even the most frightening circumstances. They learned that even when life presents unexpected challenges, hope and determination could guide them through. As the months passed, John and Mary continued to strengthen their sense of safety and security. They implemented routines for checking the property, communicating with neighbors, and maintaining vigilance without letting fear dominate their lives. The combination of preparation, awareness, and support allowed them to reclaim their home fully, turning the ranch into a place of peace and productivity once again. Mary gradually regained her sense of confidence. She could walk to the barn without fear, tend to the animals without anxiety, and enjoy her hobbies and daily routines without constant worry. Each day was a reminder that recovery was possible, that the trauma they had experienced could be transformed into lessons of strength and courage. She felt empowered not only by her survival, but by her ability to reclaim her life with determination and grace. John, too, found peace in his role as protector and caretaker. He understood that vigilance was necessary, but he also realized that living in fear was not the solution. By balancing preparation with trust, he was able to enjoy the life he loved while ensuring Mary's safety. He learned that resilience was not just about strength, but about wisdom, care, and the ability to adapt to challenges without letting them control one's life. Together, they began to envision the future with hope and optimism. Plans for improving the ranch, spending time with friends and neighbors, and nurturing the land they loved filled their conversations. They dreamed of hosting small community gatherings, sharing the beauty of the ranch, and teaching others about the importance of resilience, preparedness, and love. The future, once uncertain and frightening, now seemed filled with possibility. One crisp morning, as John and Mary walked hand in hand through the fields, they paused to watch the sun rise over the hills. The warm light bathed the land in gold, casting long shadows that danced across the grass. In that quiet, beautiful moment, they felt a sense of peace and closure. The fear that had once dominated their lives had been replaced by strength, love, and hope. The ranch, the land, and their home had survived, and so had they. They understood that life would continue to bring challenges, but they had learned the most important lesson, that love, resilience, and community support could carry them through anything. The morning of terror was no longer just a memory of fear. It had become a story of survival, courage, and the unbreakable bond between two people who refused to be defeated by circumstance. John and Mary walked back to the farmhouse, feeling a quiet pride and contentment. They had faced the unimaginable and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. Every smile they shared, every task they completed together, and every moment of calm they enjoyed was a testament to their journey. Life on the ranch was not perfect, but it was real, meaningful, and filled with love. As they settled into the evening, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Fear, shock, and uncertainty had tested them, but resilience, courage, and love had carried them through. They knew that the memory of the morning would never fully fade, but it no longer controlled them. Instead, it served as a reminder of their strength, the power of their bond, and the hope that guided them forward. And so, life on the ranch continued, not as it had been before, but in a new, more aware, and more resilient way. John and Mary had faced fear and uncertainty, endured hardship, and found their way back to peace and love. Their story was a testament to the human spirit, a story of courage, survival, and the unshakable power of hope and connection.